Good evening. I'm Kate Fahrenholt. I'm the Executive Director of NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore. I wanted to welcome you all. It's wonderful to see all these new and old friends, and I just want to explain that this evening's project is a joint project of NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore, that's National Alliance on Mental Illness of Metropolitan Baltimore, and the Compassionate Touch Network. There is immense power in the sharing of stories. I personally first told my story publicly when I became the president of the board of NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore and found myself in front of a large number of people who all knew what mental illness was. Telling my story for the first time in front of a group of people was an amazing experience for me. And it also was an amazing experience for the people who heard me. Some of the people in the audience are still close friends, and that connection from sharing my story was what made us friends. So here we are. We're very happy that we have some wonderful people to tell their stories. Thank you.
The first time I was in a lockdown unit, I was suicidal. After spending my first night in a padded room, observed by a camera, I was assigned a regular room. 2 days later, as we were eating lunch in the day room, in walked the biggest guy I had ever seen. Everyone in the room was praying he would not be assigned to their room. I think they all drowned out my prayer because he was assigned to my room. The guy did not speak for 3 days. He just glared at me. Finally, he asked me why I was in the hospital. I told him I tried to kill myself. When I asked him the same question, he replied he tried to chop his family up with a hatchet. I immediately went to the nurse's station and I informed them that I had changed my mind. I wanted to live. I don't know if putting a suicidal person in a room with a homicidal person was intentional, but it sure worked for me. My name is Royal Riddick. For a very long time, I knew something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what. I was caring for my mother and my daughter, and I felt I could not stop working to seek help. Then when my daughter was 14, I hit her, and she was taken away by Child Protective Services. That's when my life fell apart. I lost my job. I had to find someone to take care of my mom, and I became homeless. Finally, I was hospitalized for 5 months, and I began on the road to recovery. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, general anxiety disorder, and bipolar disorder. My son and my daughter have accepted my mental problems, but my 6 sisters would prefer any explanation for my behavior, including drug addiction. I have been in a mixed state of mania and depression for about 3 years. I have constant racing thoughts. It's like having a radio on inside my head with the station continually changing and the volume up a little too loud. Because of the general anxiety disorder, the station is usually changing from one worry to another. You would not believe the number of medications I have to take. Side effects are something I look at as a necessary evil. The first mood stabilizer I was on made me gain so much weight so fast, I had a heart attack. I never connected mental illness with physical consequences. My medications have given me hand tremors, dry mouth, dizzy spells when I stand up fast, and the list goes on and on. Every psychiatric medication I have ever taken has had some form of side effect. So how did I get so ill? Vietnam is one reason. Then there's another. The story that is so hard to tell is a story I really didn't want to know. That's the story of being sodomized when I was a little child. The results is flashbacks, reliving the event over and over. Between 3 and 5 times a year, I wake up in the middle of the night terrified. I physically feel like a little boy. I physically feel the terrible pain of someone penetrating my little body. I feel a panic as I try to fight what's happening to me, ultimately giving up and hoping it'll all be over soon. For years, I thought I was hallucinating, not realizing I was reliving that awful violation over and over and over. With the help of my therapist, we tied things together to uncover the real story. I felt ashamed I had been raped, even though I was a child. The only way I could process that horrible experience was by telling the story and dealing with my emotions. The story I did not want to tell would be the story that would help me heal. The other terrible experience that I've had to deal with came from Vietnam. I was one of 2 survivors of a terrifying ambush, and that was only one horrible time. There were many others. Because of Vietnam and my childhood trauma, I have dissociative episodes. That means I spend hours, sometimes days, as another personality whom I call Royal on steroids. This other Royal sometimes takes control of my life. There are people who I meet who obviously know me, but whom I know absolutely nothing because they met Royal on steroids and not me. The hardest time of year for me has always been the warm and hot months. My post-traumatic stress disorder goes into overdrive during that time of year. Loud, sudden noises remind me of gunfire or artillery. And thunderstorms take me places I hope no one on this planet has to go except me. A lot of people are out during the summer, and if I go to the Inner Harbor or an outdoor concert, I'm so hypervigilant I can hardly enjoy myself. I watch the Weather Channel constantly. Invitations to cookouts, weddings, and family functions are all undermined by a 30% chance of a thunder shower or a severe weather watch. When my grandsons lived with me, I didn't want them to know how thunderstorms triggered my PTSD. So I'd go into a hallway closet and hide my reactions to the loud, sudden thunder. One day my grandchildren were standing outside the door, and I heard one say, "Every time it storms, Grandpa plays hide and seek. And he always hides in the same place." Every day I can't wait until Halloween so that I can finally relax. No more thunderstorms. Then my general anxiety disorder begins to remind me that spring will be here again real soon. NAMI was a vehicle and a resource to help me build my life over. Nowadays, I'm a national trainer for the NAMI Connection Peer Support Group program. I'm on the board of directors of NAMI Maryland. I help with law enforcement trainings and I give in-our-own voice presentations for NAMI Metro Baltimore. The work gives me an opportunity to give back to an organization that has given me so much. Many people go into crisis with a brain disorder. The Chinese pictograph for crisis contains the characters for danger and opportunity. As for me, I'm just looking at all those opportunities.
The diagnosis was tough. My 18-year-old brother, Chris, and my parents had been working with a pastoral counselor who thought my brother suffered from depression. Then my mom called to tell me Chris was walking around Towson with cardboard on his feet, collecting tin cans. I found Chris and immediately took him to Johns Hopkins Hospital. When the doctor interviewed him, I wanted to sit in, but Chris objected. I will never forget when the door opened and the doctor explained to me how Chris heard voices, friendly voices, and that he had schizophrenia. I remember asking if this could be caused by some sort of illegal drug use. My dad was convinced that this was the problem, and he told me to ask. Well, that was the wrong question to ask that doctor. He went off on me like a strike of lightning. This boy is sick, he said. He has a major mental illness. This has nothing to do with smoking dope. Hey, I snapped back. I'm just the sister. I'm trying to get some answers. As I look back, I've come to realize why I was in this role of talking to the doctors and getting the bad news. My mother needed all of her energy just to deal with her grief. I believe that she knew the reality of what was happening to Chris way before the rest of us. She just could not deal with hearing the news from strangers. It was hard for me. My brother Chris and I were 4 years apart in age, but we were very close. We had worked together serving newspapers in Homeland, cutting lawns on Belvedere and in Govins, and catering for Jerry's. We shared a love of basketball and all sports. Sometimes people thought we were twins. Years later, my mom said to me, I should have never placed you in that position. Now I realize she saw me as someone who had been to college and taken Psych 101. Perhaps I'd know what to do or where to go. We knew that Chris was the same wonderful son and brother. We so wanted to get him back to the way we knew him before the diagnosis. But instead, we were moving on to a different path, and it felt like death. The first 18 years of Chris's life were beautiful. The next 18 years were heartbreaking. He was no longer the star athlete that college coaches were looking at. Holiday gatherings brought anxiety for him. The constant chatter of such a large family caused Chris to leave early or to go out often for a cigarette. Eventually, we began to make it through the La Brea tar pits known as the mental health system. We often felt stuck and unable to navigate. It took my entire family to make it through. God help the individual with no family support or resources. They are always in my prayers. People who knew Chris before his illness continued to be friendly. For instance, he played softball on a team with my other brothers. Yet Chris knew he wasn't the same as the other young men. He knew they were starting their own careers and families, while he never would. Chris often felt frustrated and many times angry. He spoke out about his need to control his emotions and how angry he would get when his thoughts turned to people he felt were trying to control him. He stated that these thoughts usually led me to trying to hurt myself somehow. Despite medications, his anxiety sometimes became unbearable, like the time my father was experiencing a heart condition. Chris worried so much he had to be hospitalized. But no amount of challenges with Chris prepared me for his death 12 years ago. My brother died from a sudden death heart attack in front of St. Dominic's Church on Harford Road. He was 36 years old. People did not assist him with his medical support, and this was most likely due to the fact that he usually dressed in jeans or an army jacket, and he often looked pretty rough. The ambulance took a while to get to him, and even though they tried to save him at Good Samaritan Hospital, he must have lost his battle to live even prior to arrival. I arrived at the hospital first. Again, I had to find the words to tell my parents the saddest news of all. These are the words I had told many families based on my work in the police force. I'm sorry, but he's dead. Yet they now seem so shallow. I remember when my family went to see Chris. He was so peaceful and calm. He looked like an angel. They let us stay with him for a long time, but we knew that it would never be enough. Kind words and caring were all around, but I could not hear it. I could not feel it. There would be no relief for a long time. The hardest part was being honest about my feelings. How many times I felt that so much of my brother's true personality had already died. His mental illness had taken so much from him. I remember thinking how our life as a family would change dramatically. The constant worry about Chris would cease. The 5 calls a day would vanish. The need to help Chris unclutter his room and get him the daily allowance would be gone. Also gone were the daily squeeze plays, the hugs that connected us. How sad we were, but at the same time, how conscious we were that other NAMI families with mentally ill loved ones still had to deal with so many daily issues. Even so, the truth that's so hard to express is, despite the stress, the difficulties, we wish our Chris was still with us. What kept me going is that all I learned during the 18 years of Chris's life, I've been able to bring to my job at a local law enforcement agency. This is how Chris lives on to tell his story and to teach others.
I'm in college. It's fall on campus and leaves burn like fragments of tinted neon lighting. But I have stopped seeing them. I have stopped seeing color altogether. Everything exists in shades of gray and black. I am weak and defeated. Hours go by. A Ruger handgun was removed from my apartment by the campus police. A gift from my father while I was still in high school. I'd secretly smuggled it from home to kill myself in my apartment's grubby little bathroom with the dripping sink, water bugs, and the tub with the permanent brown stains. Unfortunately, I told a psychologist at Psychological Services about it. And they, in my mind, betrayed me by sending the police to take it away. With the gun removed, I'm allowed to remain at school. But I don't get better, as I lead everyone to believe. Instead, I get worse. I am in a death spiral. I know it in my heart. I am so depressed that my skin hurts. The colors remain drained from my vision, and the slow grind movement of time, of minutes, hours, and days scour my psyche raw. Like the rectangular gears of a clock are opening up my skull every time they move. Living and breathing disgusts me. I drink beer, quarts of Black Label, Schlitz, anything inexpensive to escape. I injure myself with shards of glass, writing pens that I bury deep into my shoulder muscles, and physical punishments meant to break bone and impose hospitalization, which I am very successful at doing. My girlfriend Gina wonders where the quiet, artsy boy she met has gotten to. I don't know myself. She leaves me in the months before Christmas. I can barely move, can hardly inspire myself to rise. Then after a difficult holiday, I am suddenly soaring out of control. I stay up all night. I get into fights, tell people to fuck themselves. I read every Hemingway book he's ever written. I shoot through the works of John Cheever. I ridicule people who aren't as well read, flirt with girls in my classes. I dive out dorm windows. I smash my body into cars. And then, when I'm partially broken, bleeding, clotted with bruises, adorned with black eyes and busted knuckles, I crash back down, destroyed in a deep, deep pit of suffocating gloom. I have no hope. There's something wrong in me that won't correct itself. I cut slashes deep into my wrists that needed thread and needle to heal. Took bottles of pills, allowed untended cuts to develop gangrenous infections. Lacking peace, I sought escape. Either intentionally or unintentionally, I never attained it. Somehow after college, the heightened feelings faded. In 1991, I found something that resembled hope in a relationship I developed with a woman living in Baltimore. I quickly relocated from Charlottesville, Virginia to Mobtown. These days, I'm married to that woman. She can tell jokes that cause a person to gasp with their breath, for breath. She has a wanderlust so powerful that she plans trips years in advance, sets up collection cans for vacations to Yellowstone or Yosemite. She trusts phone solicitors and has given strange men her entire credit card number. We have two lovely kids, neither of whom ever imagines their father, who is playful and kind, rocked by an insanity so thick that familiar names and events vanish in a miasma of my brain disease. They'd never guess that joy inside of me can resemble a foul, idiotic rumor. They count on me, and the excuses, the moods, the cycling has to be dealt with, medicated, faked, pounded somehow, some way into submission. I would rather die 1,000 times than let them know the truth. Despite feeling better, when I first met my wife, I was cycling constantly. I would go to bed at night feeling normal, and the next day I'd awaken to decomposing bodies that seemed to be stacked around me. Somewhere about 2 weeks after the deep moroseness left me or took me, the opposite sensation usually began to steal my personality. I would rise, feeling light and quick and unimaginably entertaining, a state that would eventually, over about a week, morph into aggravation, high agitation, and the sensation that my skin was crawling off my muscles, that I was uncomfortable, uncalmable at a genetic level. When I breathed, I took in sharp, quick breaths, my lungs having forgotten their natural rhythm. Days after we were married, on our honeymoon, life ahead full of prospects, depression cycled back around and lurked at the fringes of my battered brain. Its presence infuriated me. I hated the illness for intruding. I went walking and wanted to scream. I held my fury inside, burning. I swore that I would do anything to make what I was feeling go away. On Cape Breton Island, feeling like an animal sinking into a tar pit, I imagined killing in me what was killing me instead of just plain killing me. It was a colossal shift in the way I thought. From that point, it took 14 years before I was finally prescribed lithium. By then, I'd taken a long list of semi-helpful to unhelpful psychotropic drugs. Since those long ago college days, I've experienced moments of discomfort so global that they would be banned if they could be induced as torture. But I have also had great successes, staggering defeats, beautiful relationships, loving children, and times with my wife and kids, brother and sister, mother and stepfather, that have exceeded all available expressions of joy. If you know me now, or have known me for many years, you might be surprised that I suffer from a mental illness. But I do, I have, and I always will. If I go off my medications, I am too quickly right back to where I was. Last fall, when I had the unintelligent idea to stop taking lithium to lose weight, I suddenly began staying up all night, hammering sloppily away at my work, watching early morning television, buying scads of rock posters online, spiraling to an unsustainable point where mania gave way to utter disgust and loathing, then depression. And I was forced once more to start again. I am bipolar.
Locked up, locked in. If I want to see my daughter, a guard with keys must open the door, search my purse, and bring my daughter to me. As I wait for her, I remember 15 years earlier. Then I was in the maternity ward of a hospital, looking through a glass wall. My newborn lay in an incubator receiving oxygen. She had pneumonia and could not breathe on her own. Now, I stand in the juvenile ward of a psychiatric hospital. Like on the day of her birth, I want to cradle my daughter in my arms. I want to erase her fears and her sadness so again she can breathe. At that moment, I also felt locked up, locked in. Today, I wear the bracelet she made for me during her first hospital stay. It is red and white, heart-shaped beads, which spell out Mommy. That year was 1991. Late one night, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. My daughter had called her psychiatrist to say that she wanted to take more medicine to make the pain inside go away. But she feared that the extra medicine might kill her. She didn't want to die. She just wanted the pain to go away. The doctor said to take my daughter to the emergency room, but my daughter looked at me and shook her head no. So the doctor instructed me to stay close to my daughter. That night, I did not sleep. I stuck to my daughter like an outer skin. When she moved, I moved. She was never out of my sight, nor out of my reach. Still, the next morning, she had to go to the hospital. She was diagnosed with major depression. When I visit my daughter, she tells me she wants to go home. She is not as sick as the other kids and doesn't belong there. I would hear those words again and again during 4 more hospitalizations. I hate it. Not my daughter, it. It makes me feel guilty. If only I had been a stay-at-home mama. If only I had recognized the symptoms of a brain disorder. The headaches that began at age 6, hiding in closets, cowering in corners. If only, I must remind myself that it is an illness. It is not my daughter. I most regret not being able to shield my daughter from the stigma of mental illness. Others only see an underachiever. You can't mean that a high school honor student dropped out of college. They see an obese young woman and wonder why she doesn't diet and exercise. They hear she doesn't have a job and say, why can't she work at McDonald's? What do you mean she can't talk on the phone, get out of bed, or leave the house? The pointing fingers, whispers, taunts, the pity, ignorance, and fear. All of it makes my blood boil. What do they know about this illness, about the impact of medications, the weight gain, 100 pounds in 9 months, diabetes, hypertension, fevers? That's why my child now refuses all medication except for herbal supplements, the kind not covered by health insurance. She hates to see a psychiatrist because she assumes he will prescribe medication. That's so difficult for me because I so much want her to receive treatment. Three weeks ago today, I flew to Atlanta where my daughter now lives alone. I had received a panicky phone call from my daughter's best friend. For the second time in 3 months, she was completely isolating herself. I was intent on securing an emergency petition and her involuntary commitment into a psychiatric hospital. I put the wheels in motion. The prior week, she had come to Baltimore, took a sorely needed bath, talked very little, and then mainly in whispers. She moved with what seemed like agonizing steps. She slept in fits and spurts and did not want to be touched. Since her return to Atlanta, she has spent most of her time in the bed. She only ventured out of the house at night to pick up food at a drive-through window and a video at a red box rental. She stopped responding to phone calls or email messages. My dread was not knowing whether she was safe. What a roller coaster. In Atlanta, I spent 4 hours negotiating with my daughter. The compromise we reach is that I will not force her into the hospital and she will seek treatment. I was on the plane back to Baltimore in less than 48 hours. The hardest thing is letting go. I understand that I cannot heal my daughter. I understand that it is important to her that she is allowed to have a say in her treatment, psychotherapy, medication, and alternative treatments. I understand that she needs me to believe in her. I understand that letting her voice have power is life-giving for her. What I also want you to know about my daughter is she's brilliant, a genius on the IQ scale. She is a gifted pianist, vocalist, and writer, an articulate speaker, and passionate advocate for young victims of abuse. She is a talented theatrical performer and an amazing teacher. My daughter is resilient. She has a laugh which fills the room, and when she dances, the entire room moves. When she is well, no one would think she has a mental illness. When she is not well, anyone can see her overwhelming sadness. My hope is that she will have a fulfilled and joyous life. My daughter is simply divine. I am a proud and grateful mother.
I am a child of Shepherd and Enoch Pratt Hospital. The hospital is a place where I sought refuge as a tortured adolescent. It provided me with a sense of community before I first set foot on a commune. I became quite comfortable in the role of patient. I thought that the stink of institutionalization that trailed me served me well, until I realized the many ways in which it did not. The alienation that I felt from the human family caused me to cocoon. My biological father deserted my younger brother, my mother, and me when I was 9 years of age. Since it was just before puberty, I felt especially vulnerable, as if I'd been thrown to the wolves. I look back and see how my inability to articulate how I felt about my father's erratic behavior has rattled me to the core in ways that I will never entirely be healed of. It makes sense that I would have wanted to cover up fresh scars and residual ones. War paint, black clothing, and death metal were not what the doctor had prescribed, and I loved it. At 15, I OD'd on over-the-counter medication. I survived, but that was the beginning of a string of hospitalizations, depression, and suicidal tendencies. I also started receiving a long list of psychotropic medications. The side effects of the many meds that were prescribed to me were interesting and unwanted. I remember being seated at a table in a Shepherd Pratt cafeteria. I was unable to spoon cereal into my mouth because my arm had frozen while making its way to my lips. I don't recall what pharmaceutical or combination thereof was responsible for that fascinating yet ultimately frustrating moment. Another medication, Mellaril, caused me to lactate at 15 years of age, which prompted my peers to ask, "Are you preggers?" Back then, I was mortified. By the time I was 18, my diagnosis was agoraphobia. I was housebound for 2 years. I almost never left the house. I had almost no friends. Bookstores and restaurants scared me. I thought that people could sense my awkwardness, that they could see that I was unable to write a check or catch a bus. Being in institutions such as Shepherd Pratt intensified my fears rather than giving me confidence. I had missed a lot of high school and all the social life of high school. I didn't know how to talk to boys or go to parties or shop. My grandfather, who'd been to college, encouraged me to take some classes. And after a few satisfying semesters of college, I applied to Gould Farm, the oldest therapeutic community in the country. I wanted some real-world experience. Going to Gould Farm was a turning point in my life. Before that, I had no friends. There I found kindred spirits. Being part of a tribe made a huge difference. There I met many creative people who liked to paint, write, and play music. The place captured me. I never imagined that I would have so much in common with the people I met there. Many had experienced similar struggles. I have stayed in touch with several of them. I met my first boyfriend there. He used to call me every day and is still my best friend. Although Gould Farm was not a utopia, I found that there are different ways to live. This experience was invaluable to me as it gives me hope. I can imagine living in a cooperative or even starting a collective so that people don't get stuck in a group home that doesn't really suit them, for example. My innate curiosity, my quest to find secret passageways through life, have brought me to where I am today, from acute agoraphobia to now, at this moment, standing in front of 500-ish people to tell my story. After being put through the ringer, I have found that raising awareness of the plight of those with brain disorders is imperative. Within me, I have a strong desire to thrive, not just to exist.
Let's continue the journey. The hardest time is the dead of winter when it's 20 degrees outside or colder. And guess what? I'm snugged in a warm bed and my mind races to where my son might possibly be. Now it seems nature would kick in for him and force him to be normal and avoid the suffering of being on the streets in the winter. Yet, I'm sorry to say, I know that not even nature would yield itself to prove his healer, because this is his fourth year. His fourth year on the streets. Oh well, I'll go back to sleep, but I will have the hardest time doing so. Yet again, would that really be the hardest time? Hey, I can remember many times when my son has been out of control. The police have been called, and in the confusion that mental illness causes, I have found myself sitting in jail wondering, hey, what just happened? For a number of years, my son had shown bits and pieces of defiant and difficult behavior. I didn't see too much of it because he was living with mom, his mom. When he was with me, we were always busy with playful or community activities. But when he was 16, he came to live with me. That's when I started to see how agitated and disrespectful he could get. It was hard to get a diagnosis. Doctors said, though, they thought he was bipolar. Still only 17, my son started living on the street, and I started living with him from crisis to crisis. On many nights around 11:30 p.m., just when I was thinking about sleep for the night, it seemed the war would break out. He would call with the latest puzzling adventure or conflict. At 2 o'clock, if the conflict was still going on, I knew it would be a long and serious night. And there were those nights. The very worst night, of course, was when he got shot. He got hit 3 times, one bullet going directly into his heart. He lives, though, and that is a story in itself. That's when I had to start explaining to the extended family what was going on. Before that, these relatives just knew when my son did something outstanding, and he did many outstanding things. Like when he would come and videotape my music concert, or when he constructed a gun at school out of paper and paper clips, for which the school didn't know whether to put it on exhibit or expel him for having a weapon on school grounds. That again is another story. Again, I thought that getting shot like that would get him to change his behavior. But his injuries only gave him a short reprieve. Then he was back to what must have been his norm: on the move, on the streets again. The hardest thing is that no sooner I'd figure out what needed to be done or who he needed to see, the problem itself would completely change and my son was off someplace else. Then there were the times I'd find a place for him to live. I'd scramble to get the money, get some clothes, some furniture, whatever he needed to get him to this place. But in a few days later, he would be back to his norm, back on the move, back on the streets. One day, his sister and I spent 5 hours painting a room for him. Of course, he was downstairs playing a video game. But he never stayed there. It seems like he can't stay any place, no matter how nice it is. He's got to get back to the streets. I really cannot understand why. I gained a new sense of what the hospital could mean. No, not just a place for a person to go who had broken their leg, but a place of refuge. Whenever things were as bad as they could get, getting to the hospital represented hope. Once my son was there was physical safety and warmth in the winter. I could relax a little better as well. The hospital was a relief for me too. There would be someone more skilled to relate to our problem than I. Even so, I had learned some skills too. At least initially, there was a feeling of hope. That's before the hospital started discharging him way too prematurely, I thought. In fact, I was so confused once when the hospital actually told me they were going to discharge him because if we kept him one more day, he would get so antsy in here, we wouldn't know what to do. Well, duh, that of course was a big part of the problem that I had looked for the hospital to help me with. How is it that I can be so willing to sacrifice as much as necessary, take weeks off of work, contact seemingly all of humanity on behalf of the problem? All to realize that the problem is now worse than it was before I started the process. What I found out is that despite my skills, my talent, my little bit of intelligence, this issue of mental illness is beyond my abilities to break down, to manipulate, to maneuver, or control in any kind of a way. And boy, that was a hard lesson to learn. My son is vulnerable to the weather, to street traffic, to other people who might take advantage of him. Still, none beats the fear of my son succumbing to the fate of another traumatic injury inflicted by persons of evil who do exist in the world, though I don't know why. His state of vulnerability keeps us glued to hope and vigilance. To me, it's like the fourth quarter of the football game. The action is frantic, much like my activity when I'm desperately trying to get my son on track before the clock runs out. He is at a crossroads now, one of many. He is seeking help and staying in daily contact for the first time in 5 years. I hope he's sitting out there in the audience. My hope is sometime soon, my son will come out of the cold.